All of you black identitarians who want to connect with African spirituality, go talk to the Copts, go talk to the Ethiopian Christians. These are the original Christians of Africa. Now let's talk about the impact of Christianity in Africa, because what then happened is that Arab Muslims invaded non-Muslim lands, imposed Islam on those areas, and slowly destroyed the African church, except in Egypt and Ethiopia, where Ethiopians fought to defend their Christian identity against numerous Islamic jihads. And there is a new jihad starting in Ethiopia that the world needs to hear about and the world needs to stand against. There is a slave trade going off in Africa, an Islamic one, where black children are still being sold. And the world needs to hear about it and stand against it. And I totally support that. And the reason why I totally support that, Leon, is because I can stand here confidently as a white man and say that Christianity is as much African as it is European. The only reason why Christianity became viewed as a European thing is because Christians in Europe managed to stop the Islamic armies from conquering our lands in a way that the African Christians did not manage to. And so Christianity developed from a position of power in Europe, where it developed as a position of persecution in Egypt. But, Leon, Christianity did develop as a position of power in Ethiopia. For 2,000 years, the Ethiopians alone, amongst all African peoples, managed to determine their own lives. They were the only African nation that managed to stop Islamic deliberate jihads. They managed not only to survive them but to repel them, but then they also managed to stop the colonial armies as well. And I want you to remember that it was Portuguese Christians in the 15th century, white European Christians, who joined with Ethiopian Christians to fight Islamic armies. Why? Because those Portuguese Christians recognized that when they looked at the black African Ethiopian, they recognized that they were looking at a brother and sister in Christ. And they died with them, and they fought with them, and they defeated Islamic jihad together, white man and black man together, against Arab imperialism, against Arab occupation, against Arabization, against Islamization. Christianity is an African faith. Bear in mind, it was Arab Muslims who killed 2 million. Did you hear that, Leon? 2 million African Christians in South Sudan in 18 years of jihad, in which they sought to Arabize the South. That is why there is now an independent country in South Sudan, because the African Christians said, we will not be Arabized. We want to keep our Christianity, and they took up arms and they fought for 18 years against a jihad that happened in the 20th century.
In the process, they lost 2 million.
2 million Africans were killed by jihadis. And too many Pan-Africans are there still talking about crimes that happened hundreds of years ago by the white man, and you're silent about the crimes of the Arab Muslims that are happening today to African Christians. Is it Boko Haram? Is that Christian or Muslim? How many Africans are dying at the hands of Boko Haram? How many African Christians are dying at the, what's the tribe called? The tribe that travels. The Arab Muslim tribe that travels there, a nomadic tribe, I forget the name.
Bedouin?
No, not
Bedouin.
Not Bedouin. That's an Arab tribe. I can't remember. What? Maybe. Yes, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I think it's the Fulani. Forgive me if it's not the Fulani. Someone will correct me in the comments.
I know they're Muslims, not the Fulani.
But they are killing African Christians. That's what's happening. So African Christians in Ethiopia, African Christians across Africa, unite, stand together.
So you're making...
But the narrative that justifies using violence against other religious communities has been well testified to in Islamic sources and Islamic practice. And that is fair. And so, yes, those jihads that killed 2 million African Christians in South Sudan, that all you Pan-Africans are so silent about, that horrific crime that happened in the 20th century, that crime was justified by Islamic teaching. Christianity is different from Islam in a fundamental way. Christianity is an incarnational religion because we believe that God incarnate into human flesh and dwelt amongst us. Which means that when Christians enter into cultures, our view is that what the point of Christianity is that the yeast leavens the whole. The point of the Christian faith is to make the Ethiopian a better Ethiopian, or the Tutsi a better Tutsi, or the Fulani a better Fulani. The point of Christianity is not to make the Fulani an Arab, is not to make the Ethiopian an Arab, is not to make the Tutsi an Arab, but to make them their better self. You see, the point of the Christian faith isn't to impose the culture of the missionary upon the indigenous. That happens by accident. The idea of the Christian faith is that you elevate the culture that you take the gospel into by contrast. And that means that people keep their indigenous languages. The Copts kept speaking Coptic, the Ethiopians kept speaking their own language. The Japanese spoke in Japanese. They worshipped in forms that were correct to themselves. So I've been to Japan, I've experienced Christianity in Japan. In Europe, when you show homage, it is European custom to bow. And so Europeans, they kneel in homage to God. You go to Egypt, you go to Japan, they don't do that. There's no concept of this kind of kneeling. Instead, you bow, a deep bow. And so that's what they do in in Japan. So the fact is, Christianity, when it is at its best, elevates and leavens the culture it goes into. It seeks to take away that which is bad and magnify that which is good. By contrast, one more final point on that. And it does that because it doesn't have a system of laws. It has a system of values that transforms the human heart that then can express itself in the local culture. Now, by contrast, Arab Muslims, when they go into a land, what do they say? They say that you must imitate Muhammad in what he did, and in many ways, the way that he did it. And so you see, where Islam has dominated, that people lose their indigenous culture. The Assyrians lost their indigenous culture. Assyria is in Iraq, by the way. The Assyrian Christians lost their indigenous culture and were Arabized. The Copts lost their indigenous culture and were Arabized. The Numidians of Sudan lost their indigenous culture and were Arabized. It was my pleasure many years ago to meet a refugee from North Sudan. Why was she a refugee from North Sudan? Because the Arab Islamist government had decided to build a dam, the backwash of which would wipe away historical sites of the Namibian people. And this Muslim Sudanese woman, who wasn't really practicing Islam, didn't really care about it, but was proud of her Namibian identity, organized a very gentle protest against the government, and she had to flee for her life. She had to flee for her life because Arabization and Islamization go together, and they don't respect local indigenous culture. By Christian standards, we're called to be a light that shines in the darkness, a light that shines on a hill. We're called to be yeast that leavens the whole. We're called to be the salt that keeps the goodness of the thing into which it is salty. These are the kind of imagery that is used in the Bible. And so Christians, we seek to take what is good in a culture and maintain it, and simply remove that which is wrong in a culture. Now, what happened in Egypt and Ethiopia is an example of an indigenous African church.
Yeah, the oldest
We
church.
have patriarchs in Egypt and in Ethiopia. We have many Christian theologians were from Africa, in Alexandria and Carthage. Many of the people that went to defend orthodoxy at the Council of Nicaea were Africans. Christian monasteries are found in Egypt. Monasticism started in Egypt. This is a European practice that we adopted from African spirituality. So we adopted an African spirituality in Europe. And I can say that proudly. Why? Because I believe in the commonwealth of the church. I believe in the heritage that all Christians share together, regardless of what their ethnicity is. Because Christians become one nation, one people, set apart unto the Lord when you become a Christian. And it's time that Christians rediscovered that in the way that we practice our faith. Christians have been in the confederacy of the church. The Anglo-Saxon Christians have been in the confederacy of the church for over 1,000 years. And you have no right to try to speak for me, you ethno-nationalists, when you try to separate out the white Christian from the black Christian or the Middle Eastern Christian or the Asian Christian. I would choose the African Christian or the Middle Eastern Christian or the Asian Christian over you every day of the week. And I would hand St. Paul's to an Ethiopian before I would hand it to a white nationalist. So in terms of is Christianity beneficial for Africa? Firstly, yes, because Christianity preserves the best of indigenous cultures while stripping away the worst of indigenous cultures, unlike Islam that simply imposes Arabization.
And what?
Indigenous dress, nothing wrong with it. You know, we wouldn't be asking people to walk around in a niqab in the forests of Africa. Why? Because we don't Arabize, we don't Palestinianize people. So Christianity is good for Africa because it will allow Africans to keep the best of their own indigenous culture. Like the Christians of Egypt suffered under the Islamic caliphates, when their churches were destroyed, when their churches were desecrated, when their brothers and sisters were told that they couldn't do their processions in the streets, that they couldn't ring their bells, that they couldn't have their churches next to a mosque, when they had to go to the caliph even to ask to repair their churches. And so many Coptic churches fell into disrepair and ended up falling down. And then the Christians were forced to build their churches outside of the cities. And they were forced to have their doors not onto the main high street but onto the side roads. And they were told that their prayers couldn't be heard by the Muslims. And when they were walking down the streets, the Arab Muslims would force them into the narrowest part of the road. And they would force them to wear clothes that distinguished them as Coptic Christians. They had to wear yellow belts. They had to ride on donkeys because they couldn't ride on horses. They were not allowed to carry swords. This is how the Arab Muslims destroyed African Christianity across the whole of North Africa and damaged Pan-African Christianity in Egypt.
Perfect.
And all of you black nationalists, Hebrew Israelites, Nation of Islam, Callum philosophy, you're all silent about it because you're intimidated by Muslim gangs in the hood.
Oh, shit.
You need to, if you want to claim black Pan-African identity, start speaking up about this history, about African Christian history. Remember, it wasn't imposed from above, it was indigenous. One of the first Christian kingdoms outside of Armenia was Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Negus was the one who took in Muslims out of a Christian sense of hospitality and justice. What a historical mistake that was.
Are you talking about when Muhammad went there?
When Muhammad sent some Christians, he sent them to Ethiopia.
Yeah, you're talking about then.
Sorry, he sent some Muslims, he sent them to Ethiopia.
Muhammad went there as well. They was getting persecuted.
Yeah.
I thought Prophet Muhammad went there as well.
I don't know, no, I don't believe Muhammad did. But the thing is, one of those companions actually became a Christian in Ethiopia.
I've heard the reverse, that the king converted to Islam after.
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
The Muslims lie about, Leon, Muslims lie about
I'm
history.
not saying it's the truth, I'm saying have you heard that?
It's a lie.
You're aware of it, it's not the first time you're hearing this.
No, it's the first time I'm hearing it, but I'm confident it is a lie. The reality is that Muslims often rewrite history. They rewrite history all the time. The Muslim Dawah people, they point towards colonial slave trade, which was a crime that went on for 300 years as a crime. But they're silent about the 1400 years Islamic slave trade. Where can I buy a black African child today if I want to? I go to Khartoum, I go to Chad. Is Khartoum a Christian city or a Muslim one? Is Chad a Christian country or a Muslim country? I go to Mauritania. Is that Christian or Muslim? Learn your history. Go and speak to the Coptic Christians about how they practice their Christian faith. Go and speak to the Ethiopian Christians about how they practice their Christian faith. I don't want you to follow a white man's Christianity. Go and follow a black man's Christianity.
Go follow the truth.
Go follow the truth and join into the commonwealth of the church. And that commonwealth in the 15th century saw Portuguese Christians from the Catholic Church and Ethiopian Christians from the Ethiopian Church fight against Islamic Jihad together in the 15th century. That's where real Christian spirituality for the Pan-African belongs. There.